Hello, thank you for joining me once again. I am continuing the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. We are on chapter 14, page 214. Thank you for subscribing, and I invite you and welcome you to subscribe. And please push the like button. So let's get started. Chapter 14, Ascended Masters and Channeling. The ancient teachings regarding channeling are very specific. However, at the time when I was at the monastery, what is now called channeling was called either spiritualism or mediumship, and channelers were called mediums. For ease of reading, I will substitute the old phrases that were actually spoken to me by my teacher for the modern channeling verbiage. Ascended Masters. Father, even before I came here, I read and heard about ascended teachers, although they are usually called ascended masters or saints by most people. Some people think it is better to follow them or their teachings because they are higher in consciousness than living teachers. Some even claim they have personal contact with them and channel them. Will you tell me more about this and perhaps what the ancient teachings say? An ascended master is essentially a true teacher who has left the earth plane and gone on to the next plane, a paradise, where all who dwell there have achieved the same consciousness of unselfish love, light, and oneness. Because of their release from the consciousness limitations of the physical plane, they do have greater consciousness. But because of their non-physical state and their choice to leave this plane and not reincarnate, their greater consciousness has limited applications for usefulness for those of us here on the earth plane. Thus, they cannot fulfill the duties of or replace the necessity for a true teacher. Early on the path, there were legitimate reasons for some of the kind of interest you mentioned in the ascended ones, perhaps often begin their spiritual quest with a search for truth that brings them to many things, including information about ascended masters. There are books about ascended masters with good and inspiring ideas. When I was young, I was thrilled to find some of these books, but they are only books and can only do so much for you before you must actually do more with your life. Why can't they be as good as a true teacher in the body? It is good to emulate the examples set by the lives of any true teacher, including those who have left this plane. Such masters and saints have left us a history that can help us in our own journeys. They left their footprints on the path through the roses and thorns. But when people take the concept of ascended masters further and consider them to be their teachers on this physical plane and follow what they can only believe to be their teachings, it leaves opening for many problems. In fact, there are serious problems with trying to follow a being that is not in our physical body. But if they may actually have greater consciousness, what could be a problem? Some people also take spiritual advice from disincarnate guides. More about that later. Others have gurus that they never see, never live in the presence of. These situations are similar to having an ascended teacher, in that none of the guided beings are in your physical presence on the physical plane. And unless you are already enlightened, even truly knowing anything about the realities of someone who is not in physical form, let alone knowing their wishes for your guidance, it is not really possible with any amount of true clarity. And true, precise clarity is a must in such situations as disincarnated guidance, let alone a teacher/student relationship. Following an ascended teacher, or even one who is out of physical contact, leaves many opportunities for self-deception. It is popular, though, primarily because it also provides the perfect rationalization, for avoiding real spiritual growth. How does it do that? Because you can seem to be totally involved in spirituality, but still deceive yourself and not face your real issues, your real blocks to separation with the One. How? Because there is room for self-interpretation, because they are not before you in the flesh, telling you what you need to do, what you need to know with words you or other witnesses cannot avoid hearing with your ears, guiding you in such a way that you cannot possibly fool yourself about. That's why following a teacher that is not in an earthly body is much more desirable to the selfish separate self. You don't have to face up to things you don't want to, and you can interpret their alleged teachings to suit yourself. Just look at the variations of claims made about what the Bible says, or what Jesus meant, or Muhammad meant. Perhaps people have burned other people alive in Jesus' name. Do you think he meant for them to do so? Of course not. And even if you believe you are in communication with an out-of-body being, such as an ascended master, you cannot be certain what you are letting yourself hear unless you are already totally free from your selfish separate self. In fact, the separate self would consider that a perfect setup. You think you are following a spiritual teacher, but the separate self censors the teachings and remains in control. How could it be otherwise when the separate self controls your subconscious mind and most everything else in your life and mind? I guess it couldn't. See, you make my point. You guess it couldn't. When you are actually in the presence of a teacher in flesh, your separate self can't get away with self-deceptions. There is no guessing, no interpretations, no lack of clarity. When you are in the physical presence of such a one, the teacher actively penetrates and exposes your illusions, saying the truth you need to hear right to your face, clarifying it if the self tries to cloud the issue, leaving no room for interpretation and leaving you no room for ignoring or hiding from the truth. When a teacher is physically before you, they will always clearly tell you when you are not being true to your inner being. That cannot be said for an ascended master, guide, or a long distance astral master. Then why would someone prefer to follow an ascended master instead of a living master, other than it is more desirable to the separate self? Have you not heard what I am saying? There is no valid reason for this. After all, a true teacher is nothing but an ascended master that has not left the body yet. A true teacher has experienced the same next step that an ascended master has, death. Let me read that again. A true teacher has experienced the same next step that an ascended master has, death. The death experience is the final step in returning to oneness with God and attaining universal consciousness, and that is the major transformation that is vital. But after consciously experiencing death, living true teachers have just chosen to return to Earth to help, instead of taking the more pleasurable route of going on to a paradise plane with their enlightened brothers and sisters. See chapter on the death experience for detailed explanation. Another reason for having a living master instead of presuming to follow a dead one is the personal attention and personal guidance that you get from a living true teacher. At best, going to channels or following an ascended master for your spiritual growth would be like learning a complex new skill, like brain surgery, by a book or tape. And that's even if the information you are getting is true and not from a faker or a negative disincarnate entity. You can learn knowledge and facts through a book or tape, but to really master a skill, you need hands-on interactive help from a teacher in the flesh. Having a real teacher in person, in the flesh, at some point in your learning is invaluable to master a skill, even with minor skills like golfing, scuba diving, gourmet cooking, etc., let alone something like spiritual enlightenment. The more important the skill, the more vital it is to have a teacher with you showing you the ropes, especially at final stages of learning. An inexperienced mountain climber in the right mind wouldn't think of learning to climb Mount Everest with the help of an ascended mountain climber. Yet, the most difficult and important skill in the world, achieving oneness with God and learning to become a teacher, that can supposedly totally achieve with only books and spiritual guides? No. In order to learn and develop, we need to try applying what we've learned. Then we need the criticism and feedback of a good teacher in order to develop enough to master the skill. And attaining spiritual enlightenment and breaking free from our programming and the bonds of the selfish separate self is the greatest learning challenge you will ever have. Attempting it without a real living teacher giving you direct, in your face, inescapable, totally clear guidance and feedback is like running around in circles chasing your tail, or competing in the Olympics without ever having a coach. Getting channeled information is not much different than reading a spiritual book. It can help and inspire if it is true. But even if the information is actually 100% true, there is no criticism to the selfish separate self, no real feedback, no unselfish love to ignite your own, no example of manifesting the universal spirit, and no light to pierce the illusions and confusions the dark self throws up around you. How many times have you heard someone channel another being that was getting on the channeler's own case and telling them they'd better get their act together and change or behave selflessly? Probably never. How many times has an ascended master really made anyone see or face all their real blocks that they were totally avoiding? You can't get away with anything with a real, in the flesh, true teacher. Even this book you are reading now might help you, but it can only take you so far. My dad's better than your dad. Zain pointed out some other fascinating issues I hadn't considered about ascended masters in a later conversation. Consider this. While some of the great so-called ascended masters are true teachers that have indeed gone on, other famous dead masters whose books you've read are only assumed to be ascended. They continue to reincarnate and are here now in other bodies with other names. You may not know who they are. Some you know now, but you know not yet who they were. This will come to you in time. You and I have been known by many recognizable names. You are considered an ascended master by some, yet you are here in body right now. You have written many books and spawned religions, but to some, Peniel, you are not so important as ascended master so-and-so. Just because you are only my student and will only be an in the flesh unascended master. But ironically, you are ascended master so-and-so. I am? Yes. And people are claiming that they are channeling you right now. Even different lives of yours, they are claiming to channel. They are? Who was I? If you need to know, it will come up to you someday. Don't go and start getting yourself on an ego trip. You have a big enough one to deal with as it is. You are just cosmic dust like the rest of us. You are also one with and part of God, like the rest of us. You are a cog that makes up the great one, nothing more, nothing less. This is all irrelevant in certain big ways. While we place all these name tags on various beings that are all just part of the same one being, we must always remember the inner being is one with the universal spirit. And once someone fully manifests their inner being, they are the same great one before or after ascension. Are these saintly beings any less great because they have chosen to reincarnate again and further sacrifice themselves for you by suffering the pains of living amidst the darkness on the earth instead of leaving the hardships of this world for the paradise that awaits them in the next plane? No. And, by the way, are you letting people channel you behind my back? Yeah, right. I'm not broadcasting my soul as far as I know. No. You would know it if you were dead and possessing someone's body. It's hard to miss something like that. But I could sure have some fun later. Forget about it. To summarize, the inner being of a living master is the same inner being as any other master, ascended or not. Sure, there are subtle differences in the personalities and souls of true teachers, but the differences are insignificant and do not provide a legitimate reason to avoid a living master in favor of an alleged ascended master. And they certainly do not replace the work that must be done with a living true teacher, regardless of who has ascended and who has not. The same spirit of all the great saints and sages is one, eternally alive and manifesting through present-day masters now, in the present, always. And it has always been so. The spirit is one. All inner beings are part of and one with the one universal spirit/being. Don't confuse the personalities of spiritual teachers with what they really are in essence. The personality is just an aspect or projection of the particular soul/self/individual that was actually a vehicle for the one spirit. So they are all really the same inside where it counts. This is one reason why there are such similarities and connections between so many of the various spiritual traditions from all parts and times of this planet. This consciousness is within us all and manifesting that inner being in a destiny we were all created to fulfill. But Father, what of the hierarchy? Do we not get guidance from ascended ones ourselves all the time? The ascended ones should only play a direct guidance role in your life after you have achieved enlightenment. After you have completed your work with a living master, you're a true teacher and attained universal consciousness. You then follow the guidance of your inner voice and universal will. After this attainment, you have a place in the cosmic order and are connected with the hierarchy, the vast order of ascended masters / angelic beings who exist in interconnected ranks between us and the source, the one. You are thus both guided by and watched over by the hierarchy, but until then, you are indirectly guided and influenced by the hierarchy. Beware of hearing voices or letting any being possess you to speak. That is not the way of the hierarchy. Other than highly exceptional circumstances, and even then, through one of the enlightened teachers of the law of one, not a student such as you, elder or not. Who is the highest of consciousness in the hierarchy? You already know that. Well, I think so. Don't think. No. You know. I'm sorry, God. It is all one, certainly, but remind me to give you some history text to read. God is all. That's why we call God the universal spirit. But that includes the hierarchy. It is not the hierarchy in and of itself. The head of the hierarchy is the entity who first led the second wave to rescue those of the first. Can you remember that now? Yes, of course. I'm sorry. It is Jesus. When our order was founded, he was known in that life as Grand Master Thoth, the life in which he had his greatest impact on the world. Other than his first was his last, known as Jesus, although he had great effects and would be known to you by other names from his other lives. Like what? Go fish. What? Learn your history, son. There are more than 24. Will you tell me just one at least right now? Joseph. Go read the biblical scrolls about Joseph and see if you can't feel inside yourself that the same inner being was the same. Witness the unselfish love, the humility, the forgiveness. It was so obvious to the open mind, even if you haven't read the scrolls detailing his incarnations. You were even related to him in the flesh more than one time. When was that? Who? I have other things I must attend to. And your ego is big enough already. How could he leave me cliffhanging like that? True teachers can be so damn enigmatic sometimes. But what can you do? You can't live with them and you can't live without them. Stay tuned to this channel. Something similar to following ascended masters is channeling or going to a channeler. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, channeling is what occurs when a living person allows an out-of-body, disincarnate being or spirit guide to possess the person's body and mind and provide information. The channeled information is generally given through speech, although it can be writing. When people channel, their goal is usually to channel higher consciousness, disincarnate beings, ascended masters, spirit guides, and etc. First, let me say that truth is truth, wherever you find it. You should listen to wisdom, whether it comes from a wise man or a fool or a channeler. And it can and does come from all of the above. So, if the information you have received from a channeler is positive and true, give the wisdom the respect it deserves. With that in mind, let's take a broad look at the limitations and serious problems of channeling. Channeling has become very popular, and I know that some of you reading this won't want to hear about any problems with it, but the ancient teachings do point out some things that should be carefully considered. For one, when you reach a certain level of growth on your spiritual path, channeling is outgrown. And if you have an open mind, the common sense and truth revealed in the ancient teachings will shed new light on the entire field of channeling, allowing you to consider some new facts and make up your own mind. So, please hear me out with an open mind and then decide. The phenomenon that is called channeling can actually be several very different things. Number one, someone channeling an actual disincarnate being. Number two, someone believing they have actually channeling a discarnated being, but they are actually channeling information from the inner being. Number three, someone believing they are actually channeling a disincarnate being, but they are actually channeling information from their subconscious mind. And number four, someone totally faking it. Let's start by looking at number 2 and 3. Some people really do channel disincarnate beings. Others just think they are channeling a higher consciousness being, but they are actually only accessing their own inner being. Now, this isn't necessarily bad. In fact, it can be safer and yield truer information than channeling a disincarnate being. Here's how it works. The channeler wants to and believes they are going to channel a disincarnate being. But for some reason, this doesn't really happen. Yet, they think it does. Instead, what really happens is that they are being protected by their inner being or hierarchy, and their subconscious creates a guide or ascended master in their mind in order to realize their desire to access higher information by channeling. But the information isn't really coming from the inner being or their subconscious. For centuries, hypnotists have known about the incredible power of the mind to create the most elaborate stories and scenarios while in trance. In fact, while some past life regressions are quite real, others are pure fabrication by the subconscious mind, down to details like the stitching in a suit. In part, this phenomenon works via the power of assumption or power of belief. See chapter on that subject. Linked with a strong desire to please the hypnotist or therapist. You can also see this phenomenon at work in both ways with the use of an oracle like a pendulum. For instance, when people believe a pendulum will guide them answers from a higher source, it might, as long as they really believe it. It will even work for a skeptic, as long as the skeptic's subconscious mind believes it. In any case, it's not the pendulum itself that is doing it. It is the user's belief. that the pendulum does it or is being guided or gives them access, which actually gives them access. Yet oracles and the types of channeling we are talking about right now are in between mediums, substitutes for being able to more directly and more purely get information from the being or the subconscious. So both the oracle user and this certain type of channeler uses their beliefs in their methods to access information from inside themselves. Information that they don't believe they have access to otherwise. Therein lies one of the problems. Using the methods can actually reinforce the beliefs and programming that the individual can't access the information more directly. And that is a major spiritual limitation to place on yourself. We'll discuss that more in a moment. As we have established, the type of channeling we are discussing can access information from either the subconscious or the inner being, but it generally mixes the two. And therein lies another problem. You can get inaccurate information that you believe is accurate. It can be partly true, but distorted by the subconscious mind's programming. That's because the subconscious programming and possible dark outside influences can filter, distort, and even totally block out the true and accurate information coming from the inner being. I have heard good channeled information, but it wasn't as good or clear as it could be because of the consciousness of the person and because of their subconscious programming. But there are times when it's not just a matter of how good the information is. The subconscious and the conscious beliefs of a person using an oracle or channeling can be seriously tainted information and cause a serious misguidance. And if serious life decisions are based on such channeled or divined misinformation, a person can make serious mistakes in life that affect both themselves and others. Zayn found me using an oracle one day and told me the following. Using oracles and such is fine at a certain level of consciousness, a certain level of spiritual awareness and evolution. There are protections from on high for the novice who is sincere and has a good heart. A spiritual innocent is watched over by spiritual guardians, just as human adults watch over human children. But just like when a human child gets older, you expect them to be more aware and more responsible about life. Our hierarchy guardians expect the same of us as spiritual children. Thus, as you spiritually grow, you must become far more discreet and cautious. If you make a mistake at a higher level of consciousness, the consequences are much more serious. And the more aware a person is, the more serious will be the consequences of ignoring the things you are aware of. As you grow, as you become more aware, you are expected to behave differently. Again, using an example of a child, it is one thing to spin around until you're dizzy, then drive a trike, but it's another thing for a teenager to get drunk and drive a car. You are a spiritual adolescent right now, which means what? Oracles are really only 100% dependable in the hands of a true teacher. because a true teacher is clear, and because he will sense if the oracle is being tampered with by dark outside forces. Of course, they can give anyone good, accurate information, but you can never be certain of the accuracy unless you are enlightened. In fact, most oracles were invented by true teachers, for true teachers. They were never intended for those whose separate selves and subconscious programming would confuse the answers. Why would a true teacher use one since they are already enlightened? For a true teacher, an oracle is a quick and easy substantiation of their own inner voice, a sort of second opinion / double check system. But for an average person who is not yet clear, an oracle can be confusing at times. Usually when the separate self has something at stake. For instance, many times I have seen a person get such an incredibly clear and specific reading from the I Ching that most people could not possibly misinterpret, yet the person is confused and misinterprets anyway, because their separate self doesn't really want the truth to be known. To give a personal example, when I was avoiding finding my true teacher, but allegedly seeking my true teacher, the I Ching would come up with something like, perseverance furthers. To see the great man brings good fortune and success. Yet I'd read that and say to myself, I don't get it. What does this mean? What should I do? I got about 50 readings like that when I was trying to avoid finding my teacher. I kept asking because I was letting my selfish, separate self pull the wool over my eyes. And so I figured that at some point, the odds alone would make it give me the answer my selfish self wanted to hear. But I fooled myself into thinking I was just doing it one more time just to be sure. When I was really looking for a way out, I was lucky that it wasn't being influenced by dark forces. But I guess the environment I was in and my destiny sort of protected me against that. Also, the I Ching will stop you at some point by actually giving you a reading that says there's no point in giving information to an impertinent fool. And that someone who keeps asking the same question over and over again is an impertinent fool. Of course, that is a blatant example, but whatever your separate self is making you confused about will usually not be remedied by information from an oracle or channel. Oddly enough, I had done the same thing. I did it before I asked Zayn if he would be my true teacher. I told Raja about my readings during one of my courses with him. I keep asking the I Ching about finding a teacher, and I keep getting more confused. It always seems to help me understand the changes I was going through or needed to go through. I'm not even sure it's working for me anymore. He said those who really want to spiritually evolve should work to change in such a way that they become more directly in touch with pure information from their inner being. If they have previously relied on oracles and channelings, they are expected to forego that in favor of a true teacher and training to manifest their own inner being. So, how do you make the changes that will allow you to get information more directly from your inner being? I ask impetuously. See, you aren't even hearing me. Clarifying it to you in person, let alone your oracle. Again, that's where a true teacher comes in. A teacher both gives you the keys to changing and manifesting your inner being and keeps reminding you to use your keys when your separate self has steered you off track, which it puts a great effort into. Plus, the teacher is a clear reflection of your own inner being. Thus, being in the teacher's presence helps you get more and more in touch with your inner being, both by virtue of being constantly exposed to it and being made aware of the inner information, and by contrasting the truth and light of the inner being against your separate self's negative subconscious programming, mind games, deceit, and illusions. As you know, the story ends well. Can I keep going? Will I make it? As we said earlier, channeling or going to a channel reinforces mental programming that your own inner being is not great or is not directly accessible, and that you cannot change and manifest your own inner being in your life. This holds true whether or not a person is actually channeling or a disincarnate being or just their inner/subconscious. Even if the channeled information is telling you that you are a light worker and can manifest God, the very process of going to or doing the channeling is restricting you from doing that and being that. Thus, it actually creates a spiritual limitation. What a marvelous circular trick of the separate self. You can see your tail in front of your nose. You can almost touch it, but you forever chase it and never get it. How does this work? I asked Gabriel one day as I was using the I Ching in the library. You know, in the old days, an oracle was often an actual person. Now they call themselves mediums or channelers. But whatever you call it, the motivation to channel or go to a channeler is the same. And it is self-defeating. It comes from a subconscious and conscious belief that your own soul, your own inner being, is not so great, or at least not as great as the oracle or the person who is being channeled and listened to. That weakens your own contact with your inner being, your own real contact with God. And every time you do it, that belief is reinforced. It also reinforces the belief that you must get the information from someone or something else. But the process does not do anything to directly change you in a way that will really put you in touch with your own inner being or make the change in which you become a vehicle for manifesting your own inner being/God in your life all the time. This belief, which is being reinforced, thus affects your programming and keeps you spiritually chasing your tail and continually limits your spiritual self-perception. You should not place such limitations on your outlook about yourself, young son, about your own spiritual greatness, or you will not grow to manifest God. But those limitations are only what you self-impose, only what you believe and how you act. Regardless of whether or not you have developed or manifested your own being, it is still the great one. The inner being is God, is universal consciousness, and is thus the highest possible awareness and source of information that can be channeled. And remember, all inner beings are one. Period. Your inner being is every bit the same as, like, as the likes of Buddha, Saint Germain, etc. You have no idea yet, but your potential is every bit as great. The only difference is that the great saints and sages chose to manifest their inner being. Did you ever hear of Jesus or Saint Germain channeling someone else? Why not? Because they didn't do it. And likewise, they don't allow themselves to be channeled. We will explain the reasons for that later. They chose the traditional path and learning from living masters as you have. They chose that instead of channeling information from other beings or consulting channeled information, just think about it honestly and remember your own soul is better than the many incarnate lower astral beings that may want to possess a human and are being channeled. It's just up to you to manifest your inner being. Here is another of the chinks in channeling armor. Have you ever noticed that channeling other beings, including the channeling of ascended masters, often seems to bring forth not just the inner being, but the individual self and the personality of the channeled beings? So even if it is real, the information is filtered through the being's personality and self. And then it filters through the self of the channeler. And then finally through the self of the listener, who further filters the information through their own self's programming. At best, then, by the time your self is done with getting the information, it's highly unlikely to be anything that will directly or truly threaten the selfish separate self. And that is what the spiritual path is all about. The death, surrendering, and rebirth of the separate self as a servant to the universal will. That is the key to true change, to becoming what you really are, to manifesting your inner being / God. Good information and knowledge will not do it for you, regardless of how good that information is. And for the information you really need, why use channeling when you can access untainted information from the highest source, your own inner being? You are a great soul. Yes, you. Again, channeling doesn't put you through the changes that having a true teacher does, the kind of changes that will make you one with your inner being, one with the ascended masters, one with God. Some people are under the assumption that some of the great psychics of history were channelers, but with extremely rare exceptions. Such psychics, if they were of the light, only channeled their own inner being or higher self. And they, too, often warned against letting other entities come through you or misguide you, and of the dangers and damage such possessions poses. The greatest of such psychics were, in fact, children of the law of one. Even some who were not consciously aware of it, and were actually in the service of the One and the Grand Master. These psychics use the incredible wellspring of their inner being to tap into what is called the Akashic Records. Such activities and abilities were all from their own inner being, operating under the oneness and service of universal will, not by going to channelers or channeling disincarnate entities, with very, very rare exceptions necessitated and controlled by the hierarchy. The person who wants to become a true teacher and work consciously and directly with spiritual seekers must also strive to integrate the inner being with the conscious and subconscious mind and manifest it in their life. through body and mind. Thus the inner being, God, and the self all consciously and subconsciously correspond. When this finally occurs, there's no conflict. There is not conflict or walls between the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the inner being / universal consciousness. Thus, there is also harmony between the conscious beliefs, subconscious programming, and universal truths. The ancient teachings of Atlantis, as well as the more modern ones of the Atlantean children of the Law of One, all warn of the risk associated with possessions, which are great indeed. Most people don't think about channeling this way, but the truth is, channeling is just a nice word for possession. And people need to keep this in mind, and keep in mind the possible perils. In a spiritual and astral sense, possession is like being raped. The being who is channeled comes from the astral realms, and when another being possesses someone else's body and mind, it damages the host's astral body, astral defenses, and actually weakens the strength of will, much in the same way that allowing yourself to be hypnotized weakens the will. That doesn't apply to self-hypnosis or hypnosis by a totally trusted mate or spiritual associate. And every time you do such a thing, you weaken your will. And you subject yourself to damage, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. You get holes in your circumvent force and auras. And dark creatures can attach themselves like astral leeches. Again, the fact is that channeling is a very nice euphemism for possession. And no matter what good words come through during a channeling, you don't know who is really doing the possessing, which means you can't be sure of the motives behind it, and thus you can't really depend on the information. And it's one thing to listen to good words, uplifting messages, etc., but honestly, aren't there plenty of other sources to get such things without possession being involved and without subsequently taking the unnecessary risks involved? You know there are. But these are strange times, and instead of running to the nearest exorcist when someone is possessed, people often pay money to listen to someone who's possessed or try to become possessed themselves. Excuse me. How many people would be as interested in channeling as they are if it was called what it really is, possession, instead of using the euphemism channeling? Hey, we bought tickets to a seminar tonight so we can listen to some disincarnate entity who is possessing the body and mind of a young woman, and learn how to let someone possess us too. It doesn't sound quite as nice as going to a channeling seminar anymore, don't you think? If channeling has a good place in your life, fine. But it may be time to grow further. Just reading this is placing a greater responsibility on you, becoming more spiritually mature. A true teacher knows this, and instead of channeling, he gets the separate self out of the way and manifests the inner being. As a true teacher is there as a tool for you to develop, access, or manifest your own being, what could be higher, more pure, and safer than channeling, manifesting your own inner being? And it is likely that you who are reading this should be a true teacher yourself someday. God only knows there is certainly a need for more. And in the future, the need will be even far, far greater. But you won't become a true teacher by merely listening to spiritual information, good or bad. Here are some final words from my discussion with Zayn about mediums and channeling, possession. Now, possession would be one thing if the only beings that would possess a body were high consciousness saints or the like. But there are many beings dwelling in the lower astral realms that cannot get a body and want one badly. And even if they are not using an attractive disguise and lies to get themselves invited in to a body by a voluntary medium, they will work on getting through other people, those who have weak astral defenses. Some of these astral realms dwellers are the spirits of disturbed humans who are between lives. Some are insane. Some are mass murderers, torturers, and cruel rapist warriors. And these deceitful, degenerate entities lie easily and well, and are happy to make up a good story too. There are disincarnate demons also. All the ancient teachings, including those of the children and their branches, tell us to avoid possession/channeling. And do not possess/be channeled once ascended or between lives. And if you consider it thoroughly, it's not hard to figure out that real ascended masters don't want to be channeled. Think about it. Put yourself in ascended master's sandals for a moment. You have worked hard on earth, suffered greatly, paid your dues, and then some. You have finally earned and chosen leaving this painful place to exist on higher paradisical planes. You live and work in new ways on new planes. You know there are other masters on earth to take care of the needs of the spiritual seekers, and they are as in touch with the inner being as you, but they can do a better job for those on earth because they are still on earth in the flesh. You know you can't tell anyone on earth anything that isn't already there for them to hear or that they can't get from a living master. And these living masters are already guided by you and your kin. They can answer any question and give any answer anyone could possibly need on the earth. If that was you who had finally decided to go on, would you want to have to go back to the earth plane in a body and possess someone when there is no need because they are being taken care of already? Why would you? In fact, when you look at it objectively, you understand all that I just said. Wouldn't an ascended master that just had to throw in their own 2 cents by possessing someone be a little bit egoed out or off? Leave them be. Ascended masters have chosen to leave the earth plane and are working on totally different levels of realms. And they don't want to deal directly with any beings here anymore, other than their hierarchical linked masters. And they know it not necessarily for themselves to do so, because they know there are masters on earth who are in the proper place. The true teachers that have chosen that duty have the proper and full ability to deal with those who really want spiritual help and information. So, if you are channeling or listening to someone who is, think carefully about who or what is really being channeled, regardless of who or what they claim to be. Here is an excellent example. Let's say you need a heart operation. You need a surgeon. You find a stranger along the side of the road who claims to have been the great and powerful royal surgeon for the court of Cleopatra, and who also claims to have all the knowledge and skills of modern medicine. Would you invite them to open up your body and fix your heart, even though they had no way to prove their claims and you had no way to check their references? Would you even listen to their information on how to do it yourself or ask them to guide your surgeon? Seriously, would you do such a thing? Of course not. Nor would you ever hire someone to work at a convenience store or rent someone a house so casually. Well, your body is a house of sorts. Your mind builds and directs your life. And when someone channels, they are letting some disincarnate stranger, something truly unknown, enter them through the astral realms, access and use/take over their very body and mind to one extent or another, all without even an interview or checking on references. And when listening to channeled information, considering the truly unknown source, shouldn't it be listened to cautiously rather than reverently? Please think seriously about this. I have heard many people talk about channeled information like gospel simply because it was claimed to have been channeled. They don't have an ounce or of doubt or caution about the information because it was channeled. It should be the other way around. Too many people who are cautious enough to not even give a clean-cut hitchhiker a ride in their car will gladly let some strange astral entity that wants to possess a living human take a ride in their very own mind and body, or listen to the words of a strange astral entity as if they were from a well-known and respected holy man. Does that really make sense? Not to me. And it shouldn't to you. The teachings in this chapter have shown new light on channeling and revealed serious problems with it. If you have used channeling before and liked it, as many have, your ego will have something at stake here, as does your selfish separate self. And accepting these truths may be a little upsetting. You may even blow me off at this point. But so it goes with truth and threats to the self. It had to be said, but please really think it over and reevaluate your opinions with an open mind, discovering new truths that allow you to grow more and go further on your path is a good thing. We all must first let go of one shore in order to cross over to another. From Mother Sheba. Even from the days before Egypt, the teachings of the Atlantean children of the Law of One regarding channeling have been simple and clear as the light. Only your inner being should be allowed to possess your body and mind, and that means manifesting God. Your inner being is the Christ. Thus, it is Christ consciousness, God, the universal spirit. It should be integrated and lived, not just trance-channeled. Why channel anything else or anybody when you can be one with and manifest the universal spirit itself? Your own part of God. What more could you possibly want to channel? What more information could you need to get than what you can get from the absolute? What could you possibly want that you couldn't get from the universal spirit? What clearer or better source of information could you have? Vishnu, another adept initiate, had this to say: if a teacher, master, guru, or whomever is legitimate, they are one with and manifesting their inner being / universal consciousness / God. Thus, true teachers only manifest their own inner being, God. In fact, you could say their very essence, their very life, everything about them is, in a sense, a constant living channeling of God. Thus, they have no desire or need to channel anything or anybody else. Think about it for a moment. What would God need to channel? Whereas the channeling of anything or anybody else must have consciousness limitations, and there could possibly be tainted motives, even if it is a true channeling. Infomercial channels. Finally, channeling can be very profitable and a great ego trip. A channeler can be a total fake. Many are. I know some of you think you would know if you were being conned by a channeling con artist, but it can be very difficult to tell. The fact is, it is a con artist's entire job to be totally believable. Their job depends on it. This is how they make their living. Believability and getting someone to trust them is the con man's only skill. Other than being very in touch with your own inner voice, you can easily buy into a con. It's only a bad con job that you can really detect. If people could really tell when they were being conned, there wouldn't be so many cons around in so many different forms. Changing channels. In summary, channeling anything or any being other than your own inner being can only be of lesser vibration at best. So, why run the risk? Why risk listening to a channeler or letting these astral entities channel through you when you can be in touch with your own inner being? Nothing can be pure until the vessel is pure. You or your channeler would need to be an enlightened being for the channeling to be totally accurate. And if that is the case, you don't need channeling anymore because you already have the information you need. Thus, entities from the higher realms and those of the hierarchy will not channel through anymore. Ascended masters did not channel other entities when they were alive, and they certainly aren't going to do it through someone else now that they are gone. They know the realities of such things, and they know that you should follow the same path as they did. They want you to achieve universal consciousness yourself by going through the proper channels. They know you need a in the flesh master / teacher who can inspire you, break through your selfish separate self's illusions and blocks, and put you in touch with your own inner being, so you can manifest the part of you that God is consciousness. I said that wrong. So you can manifest the part of you that is God consciousness. So if you are not yet manifesting your own inner being, find a true teacher that directly represents your inner being in thought, action, and word, and who can help put you directly in touch with it also. Why channeling? One time I asked Zayn about why someone would even do channeling in the first place, considering the better options for getting information. Channeling, using a channel for spiritual information or following ascended masters, is far easier than going through the changes that are necessary to achieve true spiritual enlightenment. Yet, it allows people to feel like they are doing something spiritually, learning, teaching, making spiritual progress in some ways. And this can be true during certain periods of a person's spiritual path. There may also be some good spiritual information coming out of it, which reinforces this feeling. The separate self is happy to support this activity and let you feel spiritual, as long as you don't go any further and do something that threatens its power and position. That's because while you are feeling spiritually pacified, you are simultaneously avoiding a real teacher, thus avoiding the separate illusion busting, the ego busting of the separate self that it absolutely needs if you are to gain your own real spiritual consciousness, universal consciousness. What an ingenious deception. Thus, it fools many people and becomes a major diversion, a side trap. But we must live and learn. Again, the true reason behind why most people do channeling or follow the ascended masters may not even be what they think it is. To be spiritual or to get real spiritual information. It is part of an elaborate trick of the separate self, designed to keep itself in control of your life rather than letting your inner being get control. Be a true channeler. Change, transcend the selfish, separate self, and begin to channel your inner being. Okay, that was the end of chapter 14. I've been reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. Thank you for listening. Thank you for hitting that like button. Thank you for subscribing. What do you mean you haven't subscribed yet? What are you waiting for? Now is a great time. So, until the next time, have the most benevolent day.